I'm at the American Cemetery now, and the inscription on the top of the memorial reads, "This embattled shore, portal of freedom, is forever hallowed by the ideals, the valor, and the sacrifices of our fellow countrymen." This is a graphic of where the troops moved. To the right is Utah Beach, then Omaha, then the three sword, Juno, and gold of the British Army. The United States had to the right, and then where they moved after that. This is the assault convoy routes, and these were the amphibious assault landings. Interesting how from back here it reminds me of the crucifixion, although an elegant one. And these are the beaches. I've stood in so many historical places and wondered each time what the people who were critical to that place thought during the events that occurred here. As much as it's hallowed ground in my human mind, it can never rise much beyond the level of the Polaroid snapshot remains. In other words, the part you throw away as the faint image of the picture that you keep. Quite the opposite with the human memory, unfortunately. It's what memorials are for, is to somehow try to capture and preserve what we can. And then the irony. Extremely hard to imagine or empathize with the carnage, the numbers of the carnage, until you come to a cemetery like this. Row after row in precise alignment, at once dramatizing the union of the forces that fought here, their comradeship, their commitment, their goal, the price each was prepared to pay. And yet somehow it seems to make each one part of a glob and not part of an individual, with the exception of the few that are Jewish. And it's interesting too that now it's permissible to walk above these graves, because other than the stones, they're not visible. And yet, normally in a cemetery, you would walk around the graves themselves, that 6-foot plot, 6 foot by 3 foot or whatever it is. Some of the questions we're so fortunate not to have to ask, not to be able to ask of these individuals is, was it worth the price? Would you do it again? And notice the absence of lifespans, because that would be a crushing indictment to all those who would have to fight in the future. And science fiction writers who could give birth to these people again, let them somehow finish their lives, whatever they were. And here, an unknown soldier. Some of the poignant current day visions. Known but to God, but known to somebody else here, several other people that are dead here, who were unable to speak on his behalf to identify him. And yet, doesn't every warrior and every warrior's commander usually believe that they're in the right and that the killing is justified for the ideal sought? By way of memo, 9,300 were dead, and an additional 1,500 are missing, never recovered. How is that even possible? Ground to bits underneath the machinery, floating out to sea during the day or two that it happened and consumed by the sea. What stories lie behind that? German cemetery.
There's another one down a little farther, Nate, as well. It's of interest. Okay. It says, some televised. There's been no civil war.
Oui, j'habite Bayeux.
Bayeux.
It was installed for the 60th anniversary. So here we are between two sectors. On the east, from here up to the hills, it was a sector of the 1st Infantry Division, the big red one. They landed down the cemetery that you just visited, which is at the level of a crane over there. And on the west, from here up to the hills, it was a sector of the 29th Infantry Division. In this hills, there were German defenders from the 716th Infantry Division, and they were reinforced on D-Day by the 352nd Infantry Division, which was a very bad surprise for the Americans who landed on Omaha Beach. The first wave on Omaha was at 6:30 in the morning because the Americans had to avoid the beach obstacles, the mine obstacles which were installed by the Germans. It could be mines on wooden poles, crosses of metal called the Czechoslovakian hedgehogs, wooden logs with mines or steel blades on the top. So it is why the Americans chose 6:30 to land on the first wave. It was at medium tide. They could avoid all these mines, but it was between 100 or 200 meters to cross on the beach under the German fire coming from these hills. So it is why the German defenses were bombed by the American Air Force just before the first wave, but as the sky was cloudy, most of the bombs were dropped too far in the back in the beginning, and the Navy shelling didn't work better. So most of the German guns were intact. The Germans, to defend Omaha Beach, they had 288mm guns to cover the beach with enfilade shootings. They had several 75 and 50mm guns, a lot of mortar guns, 85 machine guns. In particular, to defend the valleys like this one we went through, it was a very good system of crossfires. Across the valley there was an anti-tank wall, 2 meters high, a concrete wall, fields of mines, barbed wires. And on D-Day, the sea was very rough. So it is why before they reached the shore, there were a lot of soldiers who were seasick, tired and wet. And as the sea was rough, many tanks were lost at sea in the beginning. In particular, there were 32 tanks to land just before the first wave. Only 5 made it on the shore because the sea was too rough. And because the tanks had to cross 6,000 yards to reach the beach before, and there were 1 meter high waves. Most of the tanks were sunk. It was very difficult to make some breakthroughs in the beginning. From 6:30 to 8:30, no breakthroughs in these hills. There were a lot of German casualties, a lot of Americans were killed. It was very bloody for the Americans in the beginning. Fortunately, around 8:30 there were 2 breakthroughs, one in the cemetery sector, which was led by the Colonel Taylor. At the same time, there was a breakthrough which was led by the Brigadier General Normandy in the sector of the 29th Infantry Division. And it was made possible by the intervention of the Rangers from the 5th Battalion of Rangers in this sector. At 9 in the morning, the German strong point was liberated. It was the first on the east, the WN60, but after there were still 14 strong points to liberate. In particular, the strong points controlling the valleys like this one we went through. So, as these strong points were still active, it was decided by the General Omar Bradley, who was in charge of the landings both on Utah and Omaha, to bring the Navy very close to the shore of Omaha. Around 10 in the morning, 2 cruisers in particular came along the shore of Omaha. They navigated, from west to east. They shelled massively on the German defenses, and this time they caused big damages. The Germans had a lot of casualties. They lost their big guns. They started to run out of ammunition too, because they had been firing for hours without being supplied from the back. In particular, in the end, they only had some tracer bullets, so it was easy to see the origin of the shootings, and it was easier for the American troops, roughly around 11, to climb up these hills to liberate progressively the beach. But even after 11, it took several hours to liberate Omaha. It took a big part of the afternoon. In the end, finally, the mission was accomplished. All the beach was controlled by the Americans. As there were a lot of difficulties, there were a lot of casualties here to accomplish the mission. There were almost 4,000 casualties if we count the killed. 863 were killed on Omaha Beach on D-Day. The wounded, the missing in action, and the prisoners. 2,000 died because they were on Omaha on D-Day. So it's why it was called here Bloody Omaha. At the same time, 34,000 men were disembarked on D-Day here at the end of the day, with a lot of vehicles, jeeps, tanks, ammunition trucks, ambulances, everything to progress after. But speaking about the progression, it was very small in the end of D-Day. It was only 1 or 2 miles in the back of these hills, because the Germans had a second line of defenses in the back, in the fields, a nest of machine guns, for example. It was the night, it was harder to progress at night, and the Americans had also to demine the valleys like this one we went through to make the progression of the vehicles and the main easier. Speaking about the landscape of Omaha, it didn't change a lot, the same valley, for example, but what changed a lot, it is all these houses that you can see today, they were built after the war. There were some pre-war houses, but most of them were totally demolished by the fighting here. So here I can leave you until 10 to 5.
I wonder if it's those cliffs that were climbed in such a brutal action.